What is up, everyone? My name is Joseph, and welcome back to Casually Competitive MTG, where it's our goal to bring you semi-competitive EDH gameplay content that's both fast-paced and entertaining. And today we have something a little bit different for you, and this one is definitely more on the semi-competitive side of competitive, and we have a tribal video, a powered-up tribal video. We just finished Season 1, and before we get into Season 2, we wanted to take a little break and play some decks that are a little bit gimmicky and something we wouldn't normally put in a season, so we decided to sleeve up and power up some of the tribes that we thought were some of the best. Before we get into the gameplay, I do have a few quick channel promotions to get through. First off, if you like what we do and you want to help support us financially to improve the channel, we have both a Patreon and the YouTube membership join button, both giving you options to support us, so take a look at those if you're interested. We also have a TCG affiliate link in the description. Both the deck lists and that link are connected to our affiliate program, so if you visit the site, buy cards at no cost to you, you help support the channel. Lastly, if you do want to keep up to date with us, I would suggest following our Twitter or joining our Discord if you want to talk to us outside of just the comment section. We have some exciting announcements in terms of where we're planning to go in terms of events in the very near future, so keep on the lookout for that. But enough self-promotion, let's get into the opening hands and the gameplay. Going first, we have Nate L playing Krenko Mob Boss. This mono-red combo deck looks to ramp out quickly and just overrun the board with massive amounts of goblins, either winning through combat damage or through an impact tremors as he just creates near infinite goblins. His opening hand contained 3 snow-covered mountains, an Arid Mesa, a Gamble, an Ashnod's Altar, and a Treasonous Ogre. Going next, we have Adam playing his favorite Sliver tribal deck. This deck looks to play a lot of slivers, get a lot of value, and just eventually be untouchable by everyone else, winning through normally some type of combat damage related combo. His opening hand contained a snow-covered forest, a sliver hive, a sea of clouds, a muscle sliver, a winged sliver, a harmonic sliver, and a herald's horn. Going third today, we have Joseph playing Merfolk Tribal, and we have the classic Tymna Thrasios combination. Now, Tymna isn't a Merfolk, but I feel like she's spent enough time with Thrasios to basically be part of the family, in addition to the fact that there are very few good Merfolk commanders that give you the colors you need. The goal of this deck is to scare your opponents by dropping Tymna Thrasios, lull them into a false sense of security by just playing a lot of Merfolks, and then just take either infinite turns or win through a Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle, since that's a Merfolk, in order to win the game. Joseph's opening hand contains a Llanowar Wastes, an Underground River, a Sig River Cutthroat, a Delay, a Sea Hunter, a Time Warp, and he put a Part the Water Veil to the bottom due to the London Mulligan. Going last, we have Jordan playing Scion of the Dragon Tribal. The goal of this deck is to get constant value off of Scion's ability to dump cards in his graveyard, get the effect for a turn, and then later reanimate those dragons. There are combos in here like Savage Ventmaw and Aggravated Assault, and Scion of the Dragon just helps get there a little bit faster. Jordan's opening hand contains 7 cards, and those cards were a Wooded Foothills, a City of Brass, a Verdant Catacombs, a Lotus Petal, a Felwar Stone, a Fist of Suns, and a Living Death. Now with the opening hands and introductions out of the way, let's get into the gameplay. Nate starts off this game by drawing and playing a foil snow-covered mountain as his land for turn, and then tapping that mountain to cast a Gamble, searching a card to his hand, and then discarding a Lightning Greaves at random. He then gives the turn to Adam. Adam draws and plays a Sea of Clouds untapped as his land for turn, giving the turn to Joseph. Joseph draws and plays an Underground River as his land for turn, and with no turn 1 plays, gives the turn to Jordan. Jordan draws and plays a Wooded Foothill, deciding to join the party and pass the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, draws, and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain as his land for turn. He then casts a Mana Crypt for 0 mana, and then taps his lands and his Mana Crypt to cast a Treasonous Ogre. It resolves, and he then pays 12 life to activate the Ogre 4 times to generate 4 red mana to cast Krenko Mob Boss. With his board state established, he gives the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, draws, and plays a Sliver Hive as his land for turn. He then taps for 2 mana to cast an Arcane Signet. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Joseph. Joseph draws and plays a Llanowar Wastes as his land for turn. He then takes 2 damage from his 2 Pain lands to cast Sig River Cutthroat. With nothing left, he goes to pass the turn to Jordan. On Joseph's end step, Jordan cracks his Wooded Foothills to fetch up a Stomping Ground and has it enter tapped. He then goes to his turn, untaps, draws, and plays a Verdant Catacombs as his land for turn, immediately paying 1 life to crack it to search up a Blood Crypt untapped. He then taps these 2 lands to cast a Felwar Stone. He then goes to his end step, and since he lost 3 life that turn, Joseph draws from Sig's ability. Nate untaps and in his upkeep wins his mana crypt trigger, and then draws a card for turn. He then taps for 2 mana to cast a defense grid. He then plays an Arid Mesa as his land for turn, immediately paying 1 life to crack it to search up a snow-covered mountain to the battlefield. He then taps his mana to cast an Ashnod's Altar. Following that, he taps Krenko to create 1 Goblin. He then goes to combat and swings the Treasonous Ogre at Adam, who, on attack, gets a +1/+1 counter due to the Dethrone trigger, and Adam then takes 3 damage. Nate then goes to his end step, and since an opponent took 3 damage, Joseph draws a card from Sig River Cutthroat. Adam untaps, draws, and plays a snow-covered forest as his land for turn. He then taps for 3 mana to cast a Herald's Horn, naming Slivers when it enters. He then taps his mana to cast a Frenzy Sliver. With nothing left, and with the Sliver army soon arriving, Adam passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, and plays an Ancient Tomb as his land for turn. He then goes to combat and swings Sig River Cutthroat at Nate, who declares no blockers and takes 1 damage. He then taps his 2 Pain lands, taking 2 damage, to cast one of his partner commanders, Thrasios Triton Hero. He then takes 2 damage from the Ancient Tomb to generate 2 colorless mana to cast a Fellwar Stone. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps, draws, and then plays a Cavern of Souls as his land for turn, naming dragons when it enters. He then casts a Lotus Petal for 0 mana. He then sacks the Lotus Petal to generate 1 mana, and taps the rest of his mana to generate 1 of each color to cast Scion of the Ur-Dragon. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep, loses his mana crypt trigger, taking 3 damage. He then draws, and in his first main phase, taps Krenko to make 2 more 1/1 Goblin tokens. He then plays a Dwarven Ruins tapped as his land for turn, and then goes to combat and swings the Treasonous Ogre at Adam, and as it attacks, the Treasonous Ogre gets another +1/+1 counter due to the Dethrone. Adam declares no blockers, takes 4 damage, and Nate then moves to his end step, and since an opponent took 3 damage, Joseph draws a card off of Sig's ability. Adam, on his turn, untaps, does not reveal a Sliver off the top of his library with the Herald's Horn, and then draws a card for turn. In his first main phase, he taps his mana to cast a Harmonic Sliver, which, when it enters, destroys Ashnod's Altar. He then taps his mana to cast a Muscle Sliver, blowing up Joseph's Fellwar Stone. He then casts a Winged Sliver, and decides to be fair and kill Jordan's Fellwar Stone as well. Adam then goes to combat and swings his beefed up Frenzied Sliver at Nate, who cannot block since it has flying as well, takes 3 damage, and then Adam moves to his end step, and Joseph draws a card due to an opponent losing 3 life. Joseph then goes to his turn. Joseph untaps, draws, and plays a Cavern of Souls as his land for turn. When it enters, he decides to go against his tribe and name humans. He then taps for 3 mana to cast Tymna the Weaver, and then goes to combat, swinging both Sig and Thrasios at Nate. Nate declares 3 1/1 blockers as blockers for Sig, taking the 1 Thrasios damage, losing 1 Goblin, and then Sig dies as well. In his second main phase, in response to the Tymna trigger, he pays 2 life to cast Noxious Revival, targeting his Fellwar Stone, putting it to the top of his library. He then pays 1 life to draw 1 card through Tymna's ability, and then taps his Ancient Tomb, dealing 2 damage to himself, to cast the Fellwar Stone. He then taps his Fellwar Stone to cast a Gadul Lurker. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps, draws, and plays a City of Brass as his land for turn. He then pays 4 mana to activate Scion of the Ur-Dragon twice, first putting a Teneb the Harvester into his graveyard, and then with the second activation, searches up a Drakuseth Maul of Flames, puts it into his graveyard, and the Scion of the Ur-Dragon then becomes Drakuseth for the rest of the turn. He then goes to combat and swings the Scion at Adam, and when it attacks, it does 4 damage to Krenko, 3 damage to the Winged Sliver, and 3 damage to the Muscle Sliver. Adam then takes 7 commander damage from the Scion, and Jordan then passes the turn to Nate. Nate untaps, and in his upkeep, wins his mana crypt trigger, not taking damage. He then, not wanting to feel left out, plays his own Cavern of Souls, and decides to stay true to his tribe, and names Goblins when it enters. He then sacrifices Dwarven Ruins to generate 2 red mana to help recast Krenko Mob Boss. He then pays 3 life to activate Treasonous Ogre to help generate enough mana to cast a 1000-year Elixir. He then taps Krenko to activate it due to 1000-year Elixir being on the battlefield to generate 3 Goblin tokens. He then pays 3 life to generate a mana to activate 1000-year Elixir to untap Krenko, and then retaps Krenko, generating 6 Goblin tokens this time. He then goes to combat and swings the 2 goblins that don't have Summoning Sickness and the Treasonous Ogre at Adam, who declares no blockers and takes 6 damage. Nate then passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, draws, and casts a Call to the Kindred, enchanting his Frenzied Sliver. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, and immediately goes to combat, swinging Tymna at Jordan and the Goodell Lurker at Nate, and since neither of them can block, they each take the damage. Joseph gains 2 life from Tymna, and then in his second main phase, pays 2 life to draw 2 cards due to Tymna's ability. He then taps for 5 mana to cast a Time Warp, taking 3 total damage from his Pain Lands. He then goes to his end step and discards a Sea Hunter due to hand size. On his next turn, he again immediately goes to combat, swinging Tymna at Jordan and the Goodell Lurker at Nate, who again take the damage, and Joseph then again gains 2 life and then pays 2 life to draw 2 cards. He then plays a Dryad Arbor as his land for turn, and then taps for 1 mana to cast a Soul Ring. He then taps his Soul Ring along with a green mana to cast Regrowth, targeting the Time Warp in his graveyard, floating 1 colorless mana. He then taps his lands and uses this floating colorless to recast Time Warp. With nothing left, he goes to pass the turn to himself. On his next turn, he again goes to combat, swinging Tymna at Jordan and the Lurker at Nate, who again declare no blockers. Joseph gains 2 and then pays 2 to draw 2. He then plays an island as his land for turn, and then delves away 4 cards in his graveyard, and then taps for enough mana to make the difference to cast a Temporal Trespass, taking 1 total damage from his Pain Lands, and taking another extra turn. He goes to his end step and discards a Mental Misstep due to hand size. On his next turn, he immediately taps for 7 mana to cast a Nexus of Fate. When it resolves, he shuffles it back into his library, and he then goes to combat and again swings Tymna at Jordan and the Lurker at Nate, gains 2 life and pays 2 to draw 2 cards. He then plays a City of Brass as his land for turn, and then taps for 2 mana to cast a Demonic Tutor, taking 1 damage from his City of Brass. He searches up a card to his hand and then goes to his end step, discarding a Flooded Strand due to hand size. He then goes to his next turn, untaps, draws, and then taps for 2 mana to cast a Thassa's Oracle. It resolves, and in response to the ETB trigger, taps for 1 black mana to cast a Demonic Consultation. The Consultation resolves, Joseph exiles his library, and then the Thassa's Oracle ETB trigger resolves, and since he has no cards left in his library, Joseph wins the game. So this game may not have been what you were expecting, but I hope you did enjoy it. I know some of you may disagree with the Tymna Thrasios commander pairing for a tribal deck, however we did discuss it ahead of time and kind of agreed that a 2-color Merfolk deck would really not be able to do too well at a table against the other 3 opponents. Even with those 2 commanders, this deck is still incredibly inconsistent based on our playtesting, and honestly, the Merfolk deck just got a little lucky that that defense grid allowed him to not have to worry about interaction at all. But in the end, this game was kind of just for us to take a little bit of a break and have a little bit more fun building a deck with some more severe restrictions compared to normal. So I hope you guys did enjoy it. We do want to do these kind of gimmicky games at the end of every season for us personally, just as like a mental reset and to have a little bit of fun with it. Not that we don't have fun building the decks for the other videos, but it is a little bit of a different type of fun having to work around certain restrictions, and we want to kind of emphasize that off season, since the seasonal videos are a little bit more on the serious side, and we want to make sure those decks are fully optimal and not restrict ourselves, if that makes sense. Anyway, in terms of a post-game recap, the most valuable card for this game, honestly, as much as it hurts me to say it, was Tymna. That card just got incredible value, and without the Tymna on the battlefield, Joseph would have completely fizzled off of chaining the first few turns together, and that would have just made him a huge target. So being able to draw 2 extra cards per turn was incredibly relevant to keep that chain going until he got the tutors and the card draw he needed to put the combo that he had together. I know I don't do this often, but in terms of a least valuable card, I will have to say that Defense Grid probably, while it was a good play at the time, kind of protecting his own board and being the Merfolk player player, I had counter spells in hand that could have interacted with Nate's board, but in the end, the protection from instant speed interaction on Joseph's final turns is what allowed him to basically completely tap out to play his extra turn spells, so that did end up being a benefit for the Merfolk deck. That being said, that does conclude kind of this post-game recap. We all here at Casually Competitive hope you enjoyed this first season and this first actual organized chunk of games. We have seasons 2 through 3 at this point planned out, and we're currently planning out seasons 4 and 5, so we hope you'll stick around, and we hope you enjoyed the videos that we have planned for you. We are trying to expand into different areas of content. If you've noticed, we have the Understanding cEDH series that will be ongoing, as well as a podcast that we'd love to do regularly, so if you haven't seen that already, go ahead and check it out on either YouTube or Spotify. The link for Spotify will be in the description, and the YouTube video is obviously on our channel. So we hope you're enjoying all the different types of content we're producing. We're having a great time making them, and we really hope that you're enjoying them. That all being said, that is all we have for this episode of Casually Competitive MTG. We all here hope you enjoyed this video. I am Joseph, this is Casually Competitive, and we will see you next time.